For this project, you're going to need some paint, white paint, and either a blue or turquoise color. You don't need very much blue or turquoise, a very small amount will work, but you are going to need some white paper, some white paint. You'll also need white paper, as well as a paintbrush, maybe a Q-tip might be helpful, and something to put your paint on. I just have this lid that I squirted a little bit of white paint on it. Since this paint is washable paint, I don't have to worry about the lid so much. I also have a piece of newspaper that I took out of the recycle bin to put underneath my painting so that I don't get a mess on the table. Go get your supplies and I'll meet you back here. So the first thing we're going to start with today is we're going to take our white sheet of paper, making sure we have something underneath it so that we don't get paint on the tabletop. I'm going to take my paintbrush and I'm going to put a little bit of white paint on my brush. I want to make sure I can still see some of the bristles, and I'm only putting the paint on the tip of the brush. I do have a pretty good glob there. Now I'm going to pick a spot on my piece of paper to start. I need to decide if I want my paper to go this way. I think I like it like this. Now I'm going to pick a spot on the upper half of my piece of paper that I want to start. I think I'm going to pick like right here. So I know this is kind of weird. I'm painting with white paint on white paper. Very strange, but there is a reason for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a little circle. I'm just painting a little circle right there. Okay? Now it might be difficult for you to see, but I did paint a white circle there. Now I'm going to set my brush down for a second and I'm going to get out my blue paint. Now I'm going to add a tiny, tiny bit of my blue paint to my white paint. Tiny drop. There, teeny tiny. Now, what you might want to do is you might want to stir this up with your Q-tip, because if I stir it up with my paintbrush, sometimes I get big globs all over my brush and it just gets so messy. So I'm going to use my Q-tip, or I could even use the back side of my brush if I wipe it off when I'm done. So I'm going to use my Q-tip and I'm just going to stir up my paint a little bit. I want to make sure that I use the tiniest amount of blue so that I have a super, super light blue paint color. I'm making a tint. Anytime we add white to paint, it's called a tint. So it still looks almost white, but I can see the tiniest bit of blue in my paint. So I'm going to put some more on my brush, and this time I'm going to go around the outside edge of my circle. I'm not going to paint in the middle of my circle, I'm going to go around it like a ring. Paint around my circle. I can make it a little bit wider if I want, but I want to kind of make it looking like a donut. Donuts, yummy. Okay, now I'm going to repeat that same thing over again. The tiniest drop of blue paint, and if you don't have yours in a bottle and you just need to dip your brush a tiny bit and put a teeny bit in there, that's okay too. Just a tiny, tiny drop. Because my blue paint is a lot stronger than my white paint. It's kind of like if my blue paint were a big T-Rex dinosaur, and then my white paint was like a cute little flower sitting in the grass, and then along comes the big T-Rex and he stomps on that little flower and squishes him. Now you can't even see him anymore. So don't let your blue paint be a T-Rex and squish all your white. We want to be able to still see that white paint. Oops, I forgot I was going to stir with my Q-tip. Getting my paintbrush all messy there. So I'm stirring it up till it's all pretty much the same color. I don't want to have a big empty white spot of paint that I missed. So I'm trying to keep it in one area on my little lid here that I'm using for a plate. Now that it's stirred up, I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to get quite a bit on my brush again. And I'm going to go around like a ring again. So I'm always going around the outside edge, making nice big donuts. And I'm going to keep adding teeny tiny bits of blue until I get all the way to the outside edges of my paper. And you'll see that the tint that I've created, remember we add white, it makes a tint. The tint is going to get darker and darker and darker. because my blue color is gonna take over and smash that poor little white paint just like a big T-Rex smashing a tiny little flower in the grass. Okay, so the next thing that we're gonna do after we get a little ways out, we're gonna take our brush and we're gonna just go over some of those edges lightly. I don't have extra paint on my brush. This is what's called a dry brush technique. I'm just trying to make it so that my edges aren't big chunks of paint, and so they kind of blend together a little better. My paint got a little too dry, so mine's not blending very well. But my helpers, who are being loud right now, theirs was able to blend better. So she blended hers really nicely. So it slowly starts out as white, and then the tint is getting darker and darker and darker as it goes out to the edge. So that's looking really nice for hers. So what you're gonna need to do is you're gonna need to fill your entire paper with these circles inside of other circles. They're called concentric circles. Can you say concentric? It's kind of a tricky word, but I have a problem. I've run out of paint. I used as much as I could to finish this last edge, but I need some more. So now I have a choice that I need to make. Do I want to try to match what I had before by adding a blob of white and counting how many times I added blue drops? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I can try adding 6 or maybe 7 drops and see how that goes. Sometimes it's hard to count drops, and if you don't have a bottle to squeeze from, it might be even more difficult. So I'm just going to take a couple little blobs here and stir it up and hope that I get something close. I lost my Q-tip because my friend took it. So I'm just being very careful with my paintbrush and trying not to get the metal part of my brush full of paint. All right, okay. So I'm stirring up my paint. Again, if you have a Q-tip or the tip of your brush to stir, it works really nice. And it's better for your brushes. So I think my paint color is a little too light, so I'm gonna have to add a little bit more of my paint. But I only add a little bit of it at a time because I don't want that blue T-Rex color to take over my poor little white flower color. I want to make sure that we still see that white tint in there. Oh, I need a little bit more. Maybe 7 drops would have been right for me. Stir, stir, stir. This is the part that takes the most amount of time, but mixing is so fun. Okay, so now I think I got a color that's really close, so I'm going to give it a try. If it turns out that my color is too light or matches too closely with my last color, I can always paint over the top of it. This is really close to my last color, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end up adding another drop and stirring it from here. Now since my color is getting darker, I'm not worried so much about putting the teeniest, tiniest drop in. If it gets a little bit bigger of a drop now, it's not going to matter too much. So I'm going over the top of the last one that I did, because I know that will dry a little bit darker, making sure I don't forget this tiny corner. Then I'm going to go back to what I was doing, adding 1 drop at a time until I fill the entire piece of paper. So this painting works really well as a background for all different kinds of things. For example, if I have a really dark blue, like your blue paint might be darker than mine, and so it might look kind of like a nighttime sky with the moon. If that's the case, I could take the clean side of my Q-tip and I could dip it in white paint, and I could dip little dots of white all over, and they would look like stars in the sky. Another thing I could do with this is I could pretend that this is underwater and seeing the moon shining through the water. So maybe I could draw some sharks, and I could cut them out and I could glue them onto my paper. I could even do some seaweed or different kinds of fish. Or if I want to, I could pretend that this is the sun instead of the moon, and maybe it's a really sunny, beautiful day. I could also take some white sheets of paper and I could make a winter scene. So normally I would do this when my paint is dry, but I'm going to do it right now. So you wait for your paint to dry. I'm just going to show you some ideas. I have 3 different size circles here that I cut out by tracing things. So I could make a snowman in front of a bright sunny sky, and I could decorate my snowman however I want. I could even make some trees and put some trees in my picture. There's lots of different ways that I can use a fun background like this. So come up with your funnest ideas for using this as either a moon or a sun, or maybe even the reflection under the water. See what kind of background you can create using concentric circles, circles inside of other circles. Another fun idea for this is my daughter didn't finish hers all the way, and she thought that it looked like a cave or like down inside of a well or a tunnel. So maybe what you're going to be drawing is an animal looking out from its cave. Maybe this is like an igloo or an ice cave, and you make a polar bear looking out of its cave, checking if it's summertime yet.